Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Well, another warm, beautiful day here in the Ozarks, and it's got me out in the garden early. Actually, this is kind of late of getting done what I'm trying to do, but the weather and just all the stuff that we're doing around here on the homestead, I'm just now getting to this, and what I'm doing is turning it over, and I've got a whole bunch of compost and manure that I'm going to add to it and add that into it. And so that's what we're doing today. We'll talk a little bit about that, a little bit about the tiller, and a little bit about greenhouses and hoop houses for the homestead from a preparedness standpoint. And I'm going to get into what I mean by that here in just a minute. If you are in doing what you should be doing, planting gardens, and you're looking for a good seed company, one that I can recommend is True Leaf Market. There'll be a link in the description below. It's a smaller company, but they have been able to, keep up on all their orders, and they produce and sell organic, non-GMO, heirloom type seeds, and they have a pretty good variety out there. So they have, medicinal herbs and vegetables and stuff like that. Again, there'll be a link in the description below. So what I'm doing, and there will probably be a little backlash on this. Yes, I am tilling my garden. And a lot of people believe that you should do a no-till gardening. And guess what? I agree with you. I prefer a no-till method, and usually as much as I can, that's what I do. But what's going on here, and this is just my opinion and my advice, you can disagree with me, is that this here, when we bought this place, this was just a field, okay? And there'd never been a garden here. And this was full, and we're still getting it out. I mean, it's not done yet, and I'm only about 2/3 done of turning this over. This will be the second year in this spot. There's a lot of blackberry vines and that kind of stuff. It's windy today, so hopefully the sound comes through all right. But it's pretty rough, okay? When it's a rough spot that you're starting off new, it's really difficult. I'm not going to say impossible, but really difficult to do a no-till method right off the bat. It takes time to get that soil, and a no-till method means, for those of you that don't know, and I'm not going to go into great detail, is where you're layering compost and manure and things on top of the soil so that the soil gets broken down and it's loose, and you don't have to go in and till it every year. You just kind of, dig out a little trench or a hole to plant your plant. And it's much better on the soil because the microbes and stuff aren't constantly getting turned over and disturbed, and you turn them over and the sun kills them and that kind of stuff. But when you're dealing with raw, rough soil from the beginning, you almost have to do this for a few years before you can get your soil to a point that you can do a no-till method, which is our goal here. So I'll be adding compost and manure to this, and putting it in. The soil itself, the base soil, is in really good shape. It just needs some added to it, and we'll slowly get there, and we're hoping in another year or two, if we're lucky, keeping our fingers crossed, that we might get away with not tilling it at all. So that's what we're doing here. And like I said, I'm not done yet. I'm maybe about 2/3 done with this spot. I don't know if you can see these trees back there. It goes all the way back there, and I'm going to widen it just a little bit also. When it's all said and done, it'll be a little over 50 foot wide by about 150 foot long, roughly. I just walked it off, so I haven't measured precisely. But this is what you folks need to be doing. You need to be putting out as much food, and this isn't really a huge garden. As we keep going, I'm going to expand, and probably next to me, where you can't see, there's a couple of cedar trees I've got to cut down. I'll get those cut down and the stumps out, and we're going to turn that in also into a garden space. So this is the kind of stuff you folks need to be doing, because food is going to become harder and harder and more expensive. Dollar, all that kind of stuff that we talk about, and you need to be growing your own food. I want to mention just briefly, and this wasn't the intent of this video, but I'll tell you why I'm going to mention my tiller. It's not an expensive tiller. In fact, if you look at all of them on the market, this is considered on the lower end. This is an Earthquake, and it's got a Viper 212-inch 212 cubic centimeters, sorry, cc, engine on it. This is the second year I've used it, and again, this is really rough ground, and I've never had a single problem with it. And this morning, I went out to start it up, and it has not been started since last fall. And of course, I did keep it indoors, but it hasn't been started since fall. And it fired up on the very first pull, and it ran until I ran it out of gas. And it handles pretty well the stuff out here. It's not perfect. There's some things that I would certainly change on it, but considering the price of it as compared to some of the higher dollar models, if you're needing and really wanting a rear tine tiller, but you just don't have the big bucks to drop into one, this thing's pretty good. 16-inch wide swath. I know for this size it'd be nice to have a little bit bigger, but I really can't complain about this thing. It handles about everything. It's really a pretty strong little tiller, and I've been quite impressed, especially for what we paid for it. Now, I want to also talk about greenhouses, hoop houses, gardening, and some of the principles that I want to mention and talk about will carry through to just about anything on your homestead. And this is something that I'm trying to eventually get to on this channel and the stuff that I'm doing, of the blending of self-sufficient homesteading and preparedness. There's a lot of great information out there on self-sufficient homesteading. The problem is most of the systems that are being developed, and there's all this new stuff out there on being self-sufficient homestead and stuff, it only can ever work if you have a kind of a system in place to back it up, meaning that you have to resupply, you have to have, maybe it's electricity, or high volume running water. And if, from a prepper's perspective, there's my little turkey hen, from a prepper's perspective, if the, excrement hits the fan and a lot of the system around us starts to fail, a lot of these really great self-sufficient homesteading techniques aren't going to last. And so when we do things here on the homestead, a lot of people are like, oh, do you do this? Do you do this? Are you into that? I have knowledge of a lot of these things, and I've kind of dabbled in some of them. But what we do whenever we add something to the homestead, whether it's animals, buildings, garden, anything, we always kind of think about it from a perspective of, if the whole kind of system gets pulled out from under us, utilities and the store and supply chains and all that kind of stuff, or the dollar, the dollar collapses and it now becomes worthless and you're just kind of on your own, or the grid collapses, whatever it is. If those things happen, will this, method of homesteading, will it last? Will it be sustainable? And so I want to talk about, because this is something my wife and I have been talking about, and there's several people around our area that are doing it, and they've been talking to us, and they're like, you got to do this. You should be doing this. It's helpful. And when I'm talking about hoop houses, big hoop houses, and they're kind of like a greenhouse, but not quite. And they come in and they put them over your whole garden. So your whole garden is over a hoop house. It's not a bad idea. It extends your growing season. Again, they're not a greenhouse, but they can extend your growing season. You can start planting in an earlier time and your plants will grow till a little bit later, because the hoop house, that plastic, kind of protects it from the weather a little bit longer. The problem is I don't want my entire garden space under a hoop house, because if it's under a hoop house, I have to supply all the water for it. I have to, I can't depend on nature raining down on it. All the water that it gets is what I put on it. And we're just not at a place right now with the systems that we have around here to where we can afford to put that much water all the time. And then if, the grid goes down or whatever it is, how are you going to water that? Now, we do have a creek behind us. But you're talking hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water every few days on a large garden because none of the rain that's falling is going to actually get to your plants. Now you can work in some irrigation methods, which is something that we are toying with, but I don't want to cover my entire garden with a hoop house, because, you know, if SHTF hits and then I'm not able to maintain it with water because I'm completely dependent upon a well being run, or, you know, whatever utilities coming into the property to water it, then it's going to really hurt us. Secondly, with those hoop houses is they have that thin plastic covering. That's what it covers with. They're not cheap to replace, and they only last a few years. So you have to ask yourself, is that the best investment to put that money into it? And then again, if, you know, supply chains, dollar, all this stuff possibly collapses, when that plastic covering needs replaced, and they only last, you know, depending on what it is, 3, I've heard people get maybe 5 years out of them. When that's gone, and you're not able to replace it, it's no good to you anymore, and you've put all this money into it. So if you're wanting to homestead and have a good farmer's market business where you're producing vegetables, taking it to a farmer's market, hoop houses are a really good idea. But if you're just looking at it from a perspective of long-term sustainability, if everything happens, it's bad, and you can't go to the store and purchase things, or you can't have the normal water supply that you're used to, that could hurt you. It's the same way with, you know, using this tiller. I use it now because, well, I can get gasoline even though the price is constantly going up. I can still get it. But my goal is to hurry up and get this soil to where I don't have to till it anymore, because there could come a day that gasoline just doesn't exist, or it's so expensive that I can't afford it just to till my garden. So that's why I'm trying to, you know, get this soil to a point that it can be a no-till method. Now, a greenhouse is different. A greenhouse is a more solid structure. Usually, not always, but usually it doesn't have the thin, clear plastic, plastic sheeting. It has, more plastic, like a board, a clear board that may look like, not wood board, but panels. Sorry, trying to find the right word. That would look like maybe a corrugated metal or something like that. Those last a lot longer. And usually you're only putting those up to grow your seedlings, to get them started so that you can move them out to a garden, and then maybe you're going to grow a few vegetables in there that you can kind of grow more all year, because in a structure like that, it's usually a little bit smaller, and because of those panels being, you know, a solid, not that plastic sheeting, you're able to actually heat it if you have the resources to do so. And if you're heating it in the cold of the winter, then theoretically you could actually grow, sorry, I just had something blow in my eye, you could actually grow plants in it all year long, depending on the climate. Now, if it's a really, really cold climate, it still may not happen. And so these are the things that we kind of work with and kind of balance, in our minds and on paper, and of sounds like a really great idea. But if the grid goes down, or if the dollar is no more, or if I can't go to the store and buy the resupplies that I need, will that system sustain itself? And so what we're looking for here on this property are systems to where they can be sustainable. Again, I've talked about it with the sheep that we have. They are very hardy and self-sufficient, and we have enough property. Even though I haven't done it this year, I've purchased hay this year, but we do have an additional field over on the other side of the woods, and the goal is to get to where we're producing all of our own hay out of that field. So the sheep would be taken care of. We wouldn't have to get anything off the property, and they're small enough that I can process the meat myself with ease, as opposed to a very large steer or something like that, where you're going to definitely need more of a system in place to process an animal of that size. So that's something that you need to be thinking about as you're developing your homestead. Now, some of you may have a homestead that's been there for many years, you've been doing this for decades, maybe you have a big bank account and so you can afford to purchase more systems, that's fine. And I'm not putting you down or anything like that. If you can do that, that's great. But for a lot of people, you're either starting out, maybe you have a small budget, maybe you're a novice, whatever it is, whenever you do something, if you bring an animal onto the property that you're going to try to raise, or if you're going to do a certain kind of gardening technique or something like that, you need to think about this. You know, if you're no longer able to go to the store to resupply, if you're no longer able to go to the farm supply store, or if your electricity is gone, or the running water is gone, or the running water is only what you can, you can have a well off grid if you do it right, but if you're having to supply water for huge gardens and stuff all year long on an off grid well, that's going to be tough. Supplying your house water supply on an off grid well, it's doable if you set it up right. But that plus animals plus all of of a big garden and stuff, and because it's all under cover, it doesn't get any rain, that's a lot. So you got to think about these things. Again, there's a lot of modern sustainable homestead gardening techniques and just homestead techniques that are really cool. I've watched lots of videos, I've read books, new ways to grow things indoors. I watched one the other day. They were growing food in these big barrel looking things, and they were turning constantly, and it's a great idea, but if what happens, will that system be self-sustaining without being resupplied and having a infrastructure to hold it in place? So that is that's our goal here. That's how we look at things. So when you ask, or someone asks me, oh well, are you guys doing this on your farm? No, we're not. Why not? Because while that's a good thing right now, the grid goes down, or if I can't get to the farm store, or my money's no longer any good, I've put a lot of time and money into a system that can't sustain itself. I need systems in place here now that will sustain themselves when the excrement hits the fan and we no longer have whatever we won't have, or what we don't want to go or can't get to, or all these possibilities. So to me, that's homesteading and prepping combined. And I don't see a whole lot of that out here, on YouTube or anywhere, but people talking about that. But that's something that you certainly should be thinking of. All right, folks. Again, get out there and garden. Hoping to get this done and get the compost and manure put on, because they're calling for a lot of rain here in a couple of days, and so we're working pretty hard today and tomorrow to get this all done and get it settled so that it'll be ready here in a few weeks. We're going to be starting off with some potatoes and some early spring greens, and then here in about a month, probably 6 weeks, I guess, is where we really start planting a lot of the other stuff. So anyways, encourage you to get started if you haven't already. I understand some of you live maybe where it's still really cold and you're not benefiting from the warm weather just yet, but as soon as you can, get out there and do it. Start planning now, because you need to be producing as much food as you possibly can. All right, folks, thank you all for watching. Catch you in the next video.